This is Fearless Leadership with Brendan Keegan, a production of Forbes Books, conversations with leaders who provide valuable, candid insights from their journeys and share their secrets to what made them successful and fearless.
This week's Fearless Leaders are Potterat and Alan Eagle, the authors of the new book, Learned Excellence: Mental Disciplines for Leading and Winning from the World's Top Performers. Now, what's great about these two authors is their background. So Eric is a leading expert in optimizing individual and organizational performance. This is after retiring as a commander from the U.S. Navy after 20 years, including developing the mental toughness training for Navy SEALs BUDS candidates. So let's think about that. That's a guy who's got some real experience we can all learn from. He also went on to be the director of specialized performance for the LA Dodgers. So successful in a number of different ways. Also joining me today is Alan, who spent 16 years at Google, pretty successful company out there, where he helped executives shape and communicate the company's story. And I think we all know the Google story, so I think he did a pretty good job of shaping it and making sure it's told. And he co-authored the book, How Google Works and $1 Trillion Coach. So Eric, Alan, welcome to the show.
So happy to be here.
Great to be here.
Okay, and I know that short intro didn't do you both justice with the careers you've had, but we'll try to pull some things out of you today. So let me start with you, Eric. What originally drew you to study psychology and performance optimization? What drew you in to that as a career?
I think initially as an undergrad in college, I was extremely interested in kind of helping people who didn't feel well feel better, kind of the traditional psychology approach and psychologist. And then I, took commission in the Navy, started working with extremely talented operational individuals, operationally minded individuals, namely the Navy SEALs, my last 10 years. And then I just had this click, this switch that went off on my brain that I really enjoyed helping people become better who are already good. You don't have to be broken to get better kind of thing. So, that kind of launched a career into kind of performance optimization and working with, business individuals, elite athletes, elite medicine, law, et cetera. So I think for me, my passion was really trying to help people who were good and really give them tools and techniques that were empirically based, evidence-based, and have them even move the needle further.
So the theme of kind of giving back and helping. So interesting. So Alan, you had your career at Google, successful career, and what sparked your interest in driving excellence? What was behind that?
Well, I'm a Silicon Valley native, Brendan, and before I went to Google, I worked for 5 different startups. And 2 of them were very successful, and I got to see what it's like to be on a winning team. And then 3 of them were failures, and I got to see how demoralizing it is to be on a losing team. And winning teams are better. So, and there's a chemistry that comes together on a winning team. It's the right mix of the product, the clients, the people, the leadership, all of the above. And it's just so much fun. So what drives my interest in excellence? A career of being on both winning and losing teams, and winning is better.
Alan, it's interesting. I spent 6 years myself out in Silicon Valley, and one of my biggest takeaways, and I've used this ever since, it was probably one of the highlights of my career, is how in Silicon Valley, failing is accepted. In so many parts of the country, it's like failure is seen as, oh, you had a business that failed, but there's a community in Silicon Valley where almost everybody who's been in startups says just what you said. Oh, I was in these 4, these 2 succeeded, these 2 failed. And it's accepted. And I found as I've worked in other locations in Dallas and New York and Boston, there's a little bit of that less acceptance of failure. And I think that's one of the big lessons I took away from Silicon Valley in my time is I'm yet to meet, I don't think I ever met anybody out there that was all successes. Because fundamentally, you're entering entrepreneurism, your startups, you're saying, I'm willing to fail, and odds are I'm gonna fail. And it's just very interesting how you answer that. 2 successes, 3 failures, but no sense of the failures were bad. I actually looked at, I went 1 for 2. I had 2 companies out there, 1 success, 1 failure. And I can tell you, I learned way more from the failure than the success. And many lessons from that failure, I think about on a weekly basis as I continue to run companies. So very interesting comments there, that pursuing excellence comes with failures.
Well, we talk about that a lot in the book. We have a whole section about practicing failure as part of mindset. That when you want to apply the right kind of mindset, it's really easy to do that if everything's going great. But it's when things turn south, when you have failure, when you have adversity, that you actually get to practice that mindset. So yes, you're right. Failure is a critical aspect of becoming better, of becoming excellent.
So, Eric, we just talked about success and failure, in the business world. Can you take me down like maybe the athletic path where you helped elite athletes, get a mental edge, get a mental advantage? Can you just tell a story or two and help our audience understand like kind of what that work was like?
Yeah, I think in a 30-year career, I touched, thousands of elite individuals and elite athletes, as you said. And one of the things that I started to realize is I started to kind of consolidate, if you will, what the best of the best were doing. And ironically, it was relatively consistent, meaning I was, that hub that was listening and trying to consult and performance improve these elite athletes. But what they were generally doing and how they've been developed and how they practice things from the neck up and between the ears was relatively similar. So, Alan and I, we talk about that in the book, and it really comes down to kind of 5 main verticals, their values, kind of the core beliefs, the mindset, as Alan said, I think process versus outcome, and really focusing on kind of a recipe and being efficient and being consistent. And then probably most importantly, if I'm relatively biased, it's a bias towards what I call adversity tolerance. In high pressure, high leverage situations, think World Series, think NBA playoffs, think, pick your favorite sport. The human being experiences a stress response, right? In pressure and high pressure and high leverage situations. So I think the biggest value add is from that 4th pillar that we talk about, adversity tolerance, and what tools and techniques can we bring to elite athletes? What can we learn from them and then bring to the general population? And then lastly, balance and recovery. Those are kind of the 5 main pillars, if you will, that really the work around professional athletes or elite individuals focused on.
And Brendan, when we were working on this book, it was such a thrill for me because we got to interview a lot of people that he had worked with, athletes, famous athletes. And, I had heard Eric speak and we had talked about these things, but to sit in front of some really world famous, very best in the world athletes and hear them say the same things that Eric was just talking about, it's about their values and understanding their identity and not their reputation. When they're in the competition, it's about overcoming their fear with deep breathing or visualization. It's very real what they go through, and they really are. They're just humans who have learned how to become excellent. It's really true.
Yeah, when you talk about the mental edge and the adversity tolerance, and you think of Dodgers, I go back to probably 30 years ago. Steve Sachs with the yips for 30 years of his life, throwing from second base to first was like, just how do you get up and walk? And all of a sudden, he couldn't. And to bring it to present day, I am a New England guy. And we have a first-string quarterback with the yips right now in Mac Jones. And I just think of when you said adversity tolerance, he's been benched 4 times this year. And just, you just think of what's that do to a 23, 24-year-old alpha male, and that, hey, I'm the quarterback. I'm supposed to be the leader on the field. And when, in 11 games, when you're pulled 4 times, I just think of that mental side. Like, can you put him back in? Does he have that tolerance? And I think you talked about the 5th pillar, balance and recovery. Is the balance let him sit out a few games and recover, or is the balance put him back in there and get back after it? So I would love if you would fly to the East Coast and go meet with Coach Belichick and maybe help him out a little bit with Mac Jones. But by the way, Bill's not calling me for advice. So if you show up, don't use my name as a reference. But I just think of adversity tolerance and balance and recovery, the 4th and 5th, really, really insightful there. So, Alan, you wrote a book on Google, and Coach Bill Campbell. Can you give us any insight? So give us some insight into that book and what insights you took from the company and the person.
Yeah, my first book was How Google Works, which I co-authored with Eric Schmidt and Jonathan Rosenberg, who were two executives at the company. And that really was about the management principles of the company. And then we wrote what was essentially a sequel, $1 Trillion Coach, which was about, as you mentioned, Bill Campbell, who was probably the most successful executive coach of all time. He coached Steve Jobs as Steve rebuilt Apple. He coached Eric and Jonathan and several other executives at Google as they grew Google from a startup to what it is today. And I consider that a leadership book because Bill really exemplified the elements of what I think of as leadership. I call it the Bill Campbell leadership formula, even though Bill Campbell himself never really coined it as his leadership formula. But leadership is pretty simple. It's management plus coaching times love. So part of leadership is management, just running a tight ship, running a well-disciplined operation. It's being an operator. It's running good meetings, running a good hiring process, just the basic mundane aspects of leadership that they are mundane, but you got to do them well. And so if management might be getting the most out of your team, coaching is helping individuals get the most out of themselves and being successful as they define it. And it's a different skill set. It goes from telling people what to do and monitoring them and tracking numbers to learning about them and asking them what do they want to do and helping draw the right answers out of them. Two very different things, but the same leader needs to do it. And then I consider love a multiplicative factor. Love in the idea of forming a community, forming a team. Eric and I talked a lot about teamwork and how important it is to have a really strong team and know people have each other's back. And that comes from the leader building community and building love. So that's really it. That's the leadership formula that I extracted from the second book, which is leadership is management plus coaching times love.
Coaching is interesting. A lot of people don't realize the difference between managing, leading, and coaching. And I think coaching is, not only is it more individualized, but the patience level that you have, because you're trying to make somebody better. And that's not a fly-by 5-minute, hey, let me tell you how to do this. It's slowing down and imparting knowledge and wisdom and experience that you have or somebody into the other person, and how that really has to be done in a different voice than, say, a manager's voice. It has to be done with a voice of empathy, with a voice of love, actually with a voice of love that, hey, I am really trying to make you better. I haven't seen that formula, but I wrote that down, and that's a great takeaway. Okay, so Eric, we talked a little bit about working with athletes. Let's go back to your Navy SEAL time. So you left your role with the Navy SEALs to work with pro athletes and teams. Walk us through your decision from kind of going down that path and moving into a different, somewhat different profession.
Yeah, you bet. So let me be clear. I'm obviously not a Navy SEAL. I was their psychologist. So,
right. Yep.
I did 20 years, and at the end of 20 years, you can retire. I hit a rank of commander, and those last 10 years, I was, essentially in charge of all of the psychological assessment, selection, development, enhancement, and maintenance programs. So think resiliency. Think how do we develop that human weapon system between the ears and above the neck. I will say, hands down, without a doubt, these are the greatest humans I've ever worked with. And probably I'll say that right before, my last breath as well. So there's a marked difference between athletes and business executives and neurosurgeons, all fantastic humans. But obviously the consequences and what these men, and by the way, women do who are part of those deployable teams, most of the public will never know and really what they're leveraging and what they're doing day to day. That can take a toll, obviously. So, at 20 years, I was gone a lot, and I was, listening to a lot of stories and helping people kind of come back and reintegrate. I was always, again, that kid in the candy store. I was always very evidence-based, empirically based. I wanted to bring things to those guys deploying, doing our nation's work that we knew were backed by science. And then as I started to kind of look ahead, as I knew I was going to transition, it was a really easy fit. Here we have, athlete warriors that we call Navy SEALs and all of those integrated parts And then the Dodgers, they came with an offer I couldn't refuse, and they kind of wanted to build a very different way of assessing, selecting, and developing their athletes. So long story short, I won't bore you with the details, but I decided our daughter was at the time, had accepted an engineering undergraduate program at USC. So we just thought, hey, it makes sense. I can stay here, work for the Dodgers. So I joined, their front office as their director of specialized performance. And we had some success, obviously. Another way that we, I think in my first 4 years we won 3 pennants. And the last time we had done that was 1988. So no, it was an easy transition. If I do have a bit of a cringe moment, it's when athletes or people say, we're going to battle, we're going to war on pick your favorite sport field. It's not even close. So for me, it was simple to go work with world-class athletes because their consequences in their mind, it was bad. You have 60,000 people booing you. You have fans, you have ESPN or whatnot, maybe criticizing and various talking heads and pundits. But at the end of the day, that was nothing compared to the consequences that, we were used to in the military.
It's just a great reminder of consequences. Every once in a while, I've had a chance to run a number of companies, and every once in a while you have a bad month. You just have something really bad help you. You have a client leave, you lose a big deal, and you feel the energy in the room is just negative. And you're like, hey, guys, everything's going to be okay. And I'll use this line. No one died today. And how fortunate am I able to make that statement, in your profession for 20 years, very different. It was like, hey, if we don't perform, somebody might die today. And so I appreciate the somberness between, athletics and recognizing it's a business, it's a sport, it's important, but, the consequence level between that and military operations, just a good reminder for us in life in general. So Alan, here's an interesting question. So you and Eric are working on this project. You wrote a book, but how did you meet and how did you two come together? And after you met and you came together, how did you two say, hey, let's write a book together?
Eric came and gave a virtual talk at Google. I think it was spring of it was 2021, Eric, right? Is that about? Yeah, we were still all home from COVID. And the talk was, I think, around lunchtime. And my wife was still at home. She's a teacher, but she was teaching from home. And we're sitting down to have lunch together, which we did during COVID. And I said, there's this guy coming to give this talk. Maybe I should go sit in on it. And I don't really want to. And she goes, oh, go ahead. She probably just didn't want to be hanging out with me during lunch. So I watched the talk, and of course it was fascinating. And, Eric talked about the techniques of adversity tolerance and all the different things that ended up in our book. By the end of it, I was like, yeah, this is really interesting. So the person who had organized the talk and who had invited Eric to come and meet with us is a friend of mine. So I connected through her, and I basically sent Eric an email and said, hey, you want to write a book together? Crazy idea. And I think, we were both home going kind of, crazy from COVID. So he unbelievably said yes. So here we are. Yeah. And it's, I love the idea of meeting really brilliant and interesting people who have done incredible things and then writing their story with them. It's just been a tremendous amount of fun and very illuminating for me. I learned quite a bit.
Alan is he's a special guy. He had actually FedExed a copy of The $1 Trillion Coach, and I had read it. And I'll be honest with you, I entertained writing a book for years. I'd been asked by various publishing companies, and I always kind of declined, mainly because I didn't. Most of those individuals wanted SEAL stories, like, hey, you're the SEAL psychologist, tell us. And I wasn't going to go there. That's not who I am. So I consumed The $1 Trillion Coach in literally a day, and I really liked the writing style. So, just called Alan, and it's a really fantastic partnership. I mean, I think we kind of fed off of each other and had fun doing these interviews. We interviewed 32 of, I believe, the world's best performers in multiple verticals. I mean, we have congressmen, we have CIA, we have SEALs, we have Cirque du Soleil acrobats, neurosurgeons. And the whole idea was to try to consolidate multiple different verticals, multiple different backgrounds, gender, the whole 9 yards, and make the case for what makes these individuals the best at what they do is all learned. And I think that's the thesis here, right? I mean, I want to push people away from the narrative. And I'm so tired of hearing the narrative of I can never do what he or she is doing because they were born that way. It is literal, utter nonsense.
I couldn't agree more.
Brendan, you were talking earlier, I'm thinking about, you were talking about Mac Jones and benching him. And Eric and I, we went through a process to write a book. We had a regular process, an interview. We would debrief after every interview. We'd meet on a weekly basis. There's a process there. And you think about someone like Mac Jones has a process, and the outcome's not good, and he gets benched. And that's reacting to the outcome and not the process. And one of the things we stress in the book is focus on the process of Eric and I working together to write a book, the process you go through to prepare for a podcast. And sometimes maybe it doesn't go great, but you go back to the process and not being so focused on the outcome. And I think of poor Mac Jones, getting benched 4 times. That's not the right approach. Go back to what is his process to prepare for the game. And that's how you get to excellence, is working on the process.
No, I love hearing you both talk about how you came together. And Eric, you talked about, the 32 interviews that you did and what you learned from them. Could you share with us in those interviews, some ways that you saw people or teams, individuals or teams, how to overcome mental blocks? Were there any common themes that the people that you interviewed, so whether it was a neuroscience or an athlete or a military person, were there some common themes of how people got over that mental hurdle?
Yeah, I mean, I think really those themes come into those 5 main pillars. But if I kind of think about your question and maybe some tangible examples, I mean, I think the adversity tolerance piece is one. I think tactical breathing. You can't throw a rock nowadays without hitting someone who's talking about various breathing techniques. But we interview a neurosurgeon who's going through an extremely complex surgery. I think one of the facial nerve or something, where if he makes a mistake, it can lead to paralysis, Bell's palsy, and all sorts of things. And he feels, and he talks about, like, at times during these high leveraged, high pressure, surgeries, he needs to literally remove himself from the surgical team and practice, tactical breathing. In his case, he got on like an exercise bike. And so I do think there are, one of the consistent themes that we saw are pre and post performance routines. How does one kind of consolidate a mindset as a performer? And this was fascinating for me because I'd seen this with the SEALs, how you kind of get that kind of combat or that battle ready mindset. But then you see this with athletes, you see this with lawyers, you see this with congressmen and women. And I think the metaphor we use in the book is kind of the dimmer switch versus the on-off switch. Any performer who just tells you they can show up and perform optimally, I can just turn it on. Look, I want to be respectful, but I don't think that's necessarily true for the majority of people. There's a process by which they become white hot, right? They go through music, they go through a mantra, they go through maybe an exercise or yoga, whatever it may be. Think of like Tiger Woods and Roger Federer, right? They wear the color red in the finals. That's to kind of catalyze a mindset. So I think that's, we could go through countless stories. I mean, we have Nathan Chen, we have Carly Lloyd really kind of talking about how they weaponize their mindset to perform in the highest pressure situations.
Well, Eric, the one that really comes to mind is Marcus Luttrell, the lone survivor SEAL. And Eric, you mentioned in breathing and routines. And we were talking to Marcus Luttrell, and he talked about how he was, he's on a hillside in Afghanistan. All of his teammates have been killed by the enemy. He's being hunted by the enemy. And what did he do? He's sitting there in a hiding place, and he breathed. Breathed deep in for 4 seconds, out for 4 to 6 seconds. He breathed, and then he repeated his mantra. He had a particular mantra. So literally the things that you just said, Eric, breathing and pre-performance routine is what Marcus applied in the most dire situation possible to save himself.
One more thing that comes to mind is Alan alluded to this as well. One of the consistent things we see with the best of the best performers, regardless of the vertical by which they work or, make their living, is really controlling the controllables. And again, we hear this all the time, right? Your favorite athlete, your favorite performer, you'll ask them, or you'll see someone ask them, hey, how did you do this? And they say, hey, man, I just controlled the controllables. And really what that comes down to is three things, or are three things, attitude, effort, and behavior or actions. So there's something that we saw in the book, and we give tangible examples of that, is in order to weaponize elite performance, you only control three things in the world. You can influence and affect other things, but most non-elite performers are working outside of that circle of the core three. What's my attitude today? What's my effort right now? What's my effort level? And unless I'm physically broken, literally no one controls my effort. And then what are the tactical actions or behaviors that I'm going to, practice?
I like the controllables, attitude, effort, behaviors, weaponizing performance. You talk of dimmer switch on, off. It actually relates. I happen to run a commercial fleet company. Think of when you're out there and you get your Amazon pickups, UPS, FedEx, think about that's kind of what we do. And one of the coaching analogies I use with my team is, some people, they're kind of like an automatic transmission. They'll be park or drive, or reverse. And it's like, guys, you need to be more of a stick shift manual. You need to find gears. You need to be, running every day in fourth gear and crank it to fifth or crank it to sixth. But I find some people they are on or off. That isn't going to get them to excellence. In excellence, you've got to, live in a middle gear, but be able to throttle up, when the time comes. But you also can't live in seventh gear. You can't, if you live there, you're going to burn out. You're just not going to make it. The engine's going to blow, and you're not going to have, I think, what you call recovery and balance. So it's interesting. So, I kind of talk about that too, because I'll see somebody who's doing a great job, and then all of a sudden they're just coasting. And it's kind of like you're in neutral. You're coasting down a hill, and I tell them, you got to get in that car and treat yourself more like a gearbox as opposed to an automatic transmission. So your on-off switch versus dimmer, I think it's a one-for-one, analogy. Hey, so the last question I'd like to ask both of you, and we can maybe start with Alan. If you think of all the things you've done in your career, if you think of the book you just wrote, you think of the interviews that you just went through with all these people, and you take all of that, what's a lasting lesson that you would like to impart on today's audience in terms of weaponizing performance, using your words, Eric, and getting the most out of themselves, as you have talked about, Alan?
Say yes.
Say yes.
Yes. Opportunities come up all the time. We are too practiced in figuring out reasons we can't do things. So say yes to things. I went to a talk. I wasn't going to go to it. I was going to blow it off. I went, I said yes to it. I was interested by it. I said yes to reaching out to the guy, and here we are. Eric and I are good friends, and we wrote a book together just because we said yes. There's always reasons that pop up that come up and say, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. I'm too busy. I'm too that. No, try to overcome everything and just say yes.
So Alan, I got to share a quick story before I flip over to you, Eric. So I just, I last year finished writing a book called The FUD Factor. And in one of my interviews, I interviewed this guy. His name's John Geraci. I know he's going to listen to this. And I talked about what changed your performance. And he talks about the movie with Jim Carrey, how he always says yes in the movie. He said that movie changed his life, changed his career, because he was always the guy that said no. Hey, do you want to go to this conference? No. Do you want to go out to this dinner with this client? No, I'm busy. And he said, he watched that movie and said, I'm going to say yes. And he talks about it in one of the chapters, how saying yes fundamentally changed his life, created so many opportunities that he unconsciously was saying no to. So I just find what you just said, saying yes, you with a little prodding from your wife, listen to Eric, and you wind up writing a book together. So I just find that such practical advice of saying yes.
So many years ago, I was in my Jonathan Rosenberg, who I co-authored my first two books with, is a friend of mine, and he was at Google and I was at a startup, and we were talking about maybe I could come over to Google and do something. And he goes, Eric Schmidt's speechwriter just left. Do you think you could do that? I had never done anything I was a computer science major at an MBA, and I was like, hell yeah, I can do that.
Sure. Yeah. So, you said yes.
I said yes. And, thank God I figured it out, but Yeah.
Look how that turned out. Awesome. Well, Eric, over to you. What lesson, what thought would you leave with today's audience?
Incrementally working outside of one's comfort zone. I think this is something we saw as well that I've seen for 30 years with thousands of performers. And then Alan and I kind of highlight those, with the 32 that we kind of chose. I think I think all of us have, to quote Alan, we get in this comfort zone, right? Whether it's, hey, I'm comfortable saying no, but really, I think the key word here is incremental. I think where people make a mistake is they try to change too much too fast. And I think every human has comfort zones, a bubble that we live in. Socially, a comfort zone. Physically, I can only do so much. Mentally, maybe I'm, that self-talk says, oh, I can never do these things. So I would challenge, that's something we've learned from these elite individuals. And I think there's a level of non-complacency there where they just want to incrementally keep pushing outside of that comfort zone ever so slightly. And then over time, the body of that work, of working incrementally outside of that comfort zone, becomes enormous, right? You don't notice it necessarily in a day or two or three, but as Alan said, not only saying yes, but really working out of that comfort zone, you then develop this non-complacent mindset. That can be dangerous if you put too much resource or, you allocate too many resources towards, I'm never satisfied. You need to be careful there because you want to take time to smell the roses and live in the present. But you also want to make sure you're continuing to learn, be curious, and incrementally outside of that comfort zone.
All right, so 2 closing lessons are say yes and focus on your incremental performance. Do that 1% better today or whatever percent better, but the incremental performance. So, hey, I just want to thank Dr. Eric Allen. Thank you for today. And to the audience, I really suggest you pick up the book, Learned Excellence, Mental Disciplines for Leading and Winning from the World's Top Performers. You'll hear about the 32 leading experts in cross industries, so they're going to resonate with you, some more than others. It's a great book. Recommend you get that. Thank you for joining today. Really excited, and I think we have a lot for our audience to take away from.
Thank you, Brendan. Appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us.
This has been Fearless Leadership with Brendan Keegan. If you want to learn to live and lead fearlessly, go to brendanpkeegan.com. Fearless Leadership is a production of Forbes Books.